Welcome back inside the Now Morning Show. This morning we continue our conversation on the National Budget Review 2024-2025. This morning I welcome development economist Dr. Marlene Attz. Good morning to you, Dr. Attz.
Good morning, and it's my pleasure to be here.
How are you doing this morning?
Good, it's Friday, we're alive, sun is shining, the weather is sweet, all of these things. So it's a good day, and I'm happy to be here.
We give thanks for that brand new day, for that sun that's shining, and for the information that we've been sharing all week long. Because since Monday, of course, everybody's been going crazy with the budget fever. But I really wanted to take the time this morning to start off by breaking down, as citizens, what should we be listening when we listen to the budget? And we're viewing all these reviews, everybody's talking, everybody have their opinion, who said this, and we should put money here, and we should put money there. But what are the things when we listen to a budget presentation or we review budget documents? What are the things that we should be paying attention to as citizens?
How much time we have?
20 minutes. Go ahead.
All right. It's a good question to ask, because I think very often we get caught up in, I wonder if gas going up, I wonder if cigarettes going up. So you find people piling into the gas stations to put up gas because they hear it going and go up. And then when the budget is actually read, it's always, oh God, they get so much. How come they get so much? This little. And I am really appreciating the fact that you pose the question, let's move away from that, from the numbers game. And for me as a citizen, so yes, I'm an economist, but I'm also a citizen, so I go to the supermarket, I go to the market, I have strong feelings about farmers and about buying local produce. So I think for us as citizens, while the agriculture sector did not command a high allocation in the budget, it just got just over 1 million, 1.1 something, as opposed to the big ticket items that would have got like 5 million, et cetera, health, education, national security. I think for us, the conversation in Trinidad had begun. One of the conversations really should be, how do we reconcile a conversation that says we're spending too much money importing food, and reconcile that fact with what is happening in the local agriculture sector, and how many of us actually support farmers, and what incentives are in place. And when I say incentives, I know somebody in the Ministry of Agriculture is going to jump up and say, have a set of incentives. But many of our farmers can't access them because you need things like land tenure, and some of our farmers don't have land tenure. So the conversation really is, in the case of agriculture, what can we do differently to, one, encourage people to buy local, and two, support our farmers so that they put more into the local market. I know NAMDEFCO is doing some wonderful things with their farmers markets throughout the country, but the Savannah, for example, the market, for example, at the Savannah doesn't have a fixed place. So whenever there's an activity in the Savannah, they're moved, and it poses inconvenience to the farmers, but also to the patrons. The other thing that I want to say in terms of citizen, Jean and John, how we look at the budget is, it's really value for money and the return on the investment. So we know that national security is a pain point for us in the country. Crime is on everybody's lips. So it's not so much, again, for me, the allocation, but really the return on the expenditure. What are we seeing happening differently? And to be honest, there's not quite a lot that we're seeing happening differently, even though national security has enjoyed some of the largest allocations, historically. So I think we need to do things differently. I think we need to look at how efficient are our systems in terms of our national security architecture. What is the return? So when you spend $5 billion, I don't know if the population understands. I plenty zeros. It's plenty money. It's plenty money. So we have to ask ourselves, having spent that plenty money,
what do we
how come we're not seeing things looking differently? So money is being put into more vehicles for the police service. And last budget 2024, the Minister of Finance announced that they were going to increase the number of recruits. And all of these things are important. Don't get me wrong. The resources are important, both the human resources and the financial resources. But we as the population, Marlene Attz as Citizen Jane, I kind of like to want to know, well, can I walk down the road at 6 o'clock and, just take a walk, feel that sense of security. So I think for many of us, we want to feel, as citizens, we want to feel that there is a return on the expenditure for us in terms of all of these billions of dollars being spent in the respective ministries. And then, of course, there are other things that we can talk about, the minimum wage for public sector, minimum wage workers, the 5% being offered.
Before we get on to that next aspect of things, I want to touch on that national security bit, because you would have mentioned one of the things in the last budget that the Minister of Finance announced was that they're going to do more recruiting.
That's right.
So they're going to get 1,000, I think he said.
Ramp up, yes.
But when we look back at the files, we see that they only had one passing out ceremony this year, earlier this year, which was about 300 people, and then they had another one for like 99 people. So we didn't get to that target.
And that's the other thing that I would like to see in our budgets moving forward, a sense of accountability. So this is what you said last year. How did that line up? And to his credit, I don't want the Minister of Finance buffing me, to his credit, he says that the respective line ministers, the budget debate starts today, the respective line ministers will go into greater detail in terms of what has been happening in their respective portfolios. So I would welcome conversations from the different ministers in terms of what was said last year or what was said the year before, and where are we now, because it is not lost on the population that we're kind of gearing up for an election. So I think we would like to see what has been happening, but crime continues to be a pain point. We have several other pain points in the country, and we see allocations year after year being made to the respective ministries. So I think as citizens, as the taxpayers, as the people who contribute to these billions of dollars being spent, I think we'd like to have a conversation as well. Okay, this is what we did, this is what we couldn't do, this is what we're 90% close to finishing, this is what we aim at. I think it builds for greater participation and understanding, so that people are not glued to their TV for 5 hours and 13 minutes waiting to find out, well, gas going up. I think the conversation has to. But
at the beginning of the budget presentation, isn't that kind of what he does, where he kind of goes through a brief review as to...
He does a review of a high-level review of what is happening in the global space, what is happening in the national space. But when you talk about we kept inflation rates low and the global supply chain, average Jane and Joe don't quite understand what that means, and which is why I welcome the opportunity to come on programs like the Now Morning Show to kind of have the conversation with the people, because a lot of people, if gas are going up and
nothing change,
as far as they can see, and there's so much happening in the budget, including the fact that the government is getting lower revenues from the main source, which is our energy sector, which is why the Minister of Finance was pressing for the Revenue Authority so he could collect more taxes, because we have a significant amount of what we call tax leakages. Government is not capturing the amount of revenue from tax that they should. So the Revenue Authority is supposed to help close that gap to the tune of about $10 billion. So it's all of these things that the population, I think, doesn't quite appreciate, because we're simply sitting looking for gas going up or cigarettes going up or something else.
I think the population is interested in the things that directly affect them.
That's right.
And the things that indirectly affect them, they don't realize.
All of these things affect all of us. I mean, they may not affect us immediately. So if the prices at the fuel pump went up from the next day, that would have affected you directly. But government having a challenge in terms of its revenue does affect us, because the mid-year review will soon come along next April, May. And the Minister of Finance may have to tell you that he may have to change things. So he may have to implement some fiscal measures, because his shortfall in revenue, he might have realized a shortfall in revenue. So one of the things that we need to understand, when the minister stands and presents on Monday, the end of the fiscal year, which is usually September 30th. So anywhere around that time, you would hear him presenting the budget. His revenue estimates are based on projections. He does not know what will happen in the global space that could impact on those revenue projections. So next week, well, even on Monday when he was presenting the budget, as he was presenting, by the time he was finished, we came off to the news that there was something happening in the Middle East, which could accelerate, it could decelerate. All of these things have an impact on Trinidad and Tobago. What is taking place in the U.S. elections, as much as we like to sit down and watch the comments between Trump and Kamala Harris and those kinds of things, the outcome of the U.S. elections has an impact on geopolitical relations and ultimately on Trinidad and Tobago.
Would it have an impact as well, you think, on that Dragon gas deal that we've been negotiating?
Well, I think it might, because depending on the temperature of whomever becomes president, they could take a hard position against President Maduro, and we don't know how that hard position may or may not manifest itself
and affect us
in terms of investments in Venezuela. So there is a lot to unpack that will impact on Trinidad and Tobago. So yes, I understand that we're looking at the immediate gas going up, so therefore cost of living going up, property tax, etc., etc., etc. But practically everything in the budget has a direct or an indirect impact on the average citizen.
All right. I have to ask, do you see any strengths in the budget?
Yes, and the strength is an interesting one. It's not an immediately obvious strength, but I think the Minister of Finance, notwithstanding the challenges he's facing from a revenue perspective, managed to give a budget that really did not impact on people directly in the immediate term. So I've described it as a cleverly calibrated budget, simply because I was expecting things to be a little worse in terms of what he would say and the direct impact. But then, of course, I quickly reminded myself that we're kind of on the journey to an election, so we probably didn't want to do anything too painful.
But it's and that's the interesting part for me, because normally when we get in closer to an election, the budget tends to have some more goodies in it.
Yeah, but there's no money for goodies. So this is why I think it was strategically and cleverly calibrated. So you gave the minimum wage earners in the public sector a little increase. You put 5%, sweetener on the table for those unions that want to negotiate on behalf of their members. But it's really nothing too tangible. You just kind of like plant a seed there and see if it germinates and what comes out of it. But I think the sweeteners that we've grown accustomed to, in the manner in which we've grown accustomed to them, simply are not available because the government has a constraint in terms of its financial resources.
Aside from energy and taxation, is there any sort of opportunity for revenue generation within the budget that you've seen?
Yes. One of the things that the minister has spoken highly about, and when you look at the documentation, because the budget speech at 170-something pages is one document, but there are a whole set of
the estimates and the PSIP and all that stuff.
So the manufacturing sector has in fact been helping to fill the gap in terms of shortfalls in revenue from the energy sector. So the manufacturing sector has been doing its part and growing, and I think expected to get about 16% of government revenue, becoming one of the second largest source of revenue for the government. So you will see more and more, and clearly they're earning foreign exchange, which is another conversation for another time. But so there are things happening, and then of course you heard the attention being paid to creative sectors. So it's really a lot is in the document. So there are two things. One, how do we unpack it, and how do we implement?
You said a lot of attention is being paid to the creative sector?
Well, some attention, sorry. We've spoken about it.
No, I'm asking genuinely, because the only thing that I saw or heard of it was the building of the new building for Pantrabago and Ministry of Tourism and all that stuff.
Yes, but in previous budgets, there was attention paid to the creatives and the orange economy, etc., etc. You want to put me on the spot. But moving swiftly along. But I do think, seriously, I think one of the challenges that we've had, and which is why I referred not simply to this year's budget, but to previous budgets, the implementation deficit. We talk about a lot of things, and then we don't see them realized. So even though it may not have been explicitly mentioned in this year's budget, we know that there's been talk about the orange economy and the creatives and all of these things in the past.
We've been talking about diversification in general for a while.
Since Rock of Ages was a pebble. But so, I mean, we're talking about, so there's tourism to take place in Tobago, all of these things. But it's really the implementation. How do we advance the conversations in a way that allow us to realize the benefits? And I think that is where the challenge is. And I always, fingers and toes crossed that the line ministers, when they contribute, they actually speak to those things, and very often they don't. We deal with what is in the present and what we think is what the population wants to hear now, or what sounds good in terms of, well, this is what I've been doing, etc., etc. So I would personally like to see a lot more alignment and coordination. And what has happened, the current government has been sitting in office for the last 9 years. I think it's an opportune time for us to see some cohesiveness in terms of what has been happening and how we have advanced as a country. And a lot of good things have happened, but I think the population now is a good time to kind of cause all of these things to coalesce so the population understands where we are, and where we plan to go. But certainly one of the challenges is the implementation deficit. We talk a lot and we're not very good at implementing.
This is a pain point for me because I've been complaining about that for quite some time. One of the things that's interesting is that the minister would have mentioned, that we're in a good place economically. So we're saying on one hand that we're having hardships and that we don't have the revenue that we thought we would have had. But the minister is saying we're in a better place than we were BC, before COVID.
Yeah.
So how do we as citizens now take that information and say, all right, we're running with this. The economy is in a better place, but we're still not able to do what we...
Okay, so let me just try to disaggregate that, because as I said, I distinguish between Marlene Attz, the economist, and Marlene Attz, the citizen. So as the economist, you will see that 2019 BC, we had revenue of close to $50 billion. Of course, during COVID, that would have significantly declined. And when the minister talks about there being economic growth, when you look at the revenue figures, you'll see that from 2020 to 2023, we have been seeing increases in revenue from 2022. So because, thanks to President Putin, he drove up energy prices. So in 2022, we got a little extra money that we didn't expect to get because energy prices were extremely high. 2023, we saw some economic growth supported by the manufacturing sector, as I mentioned. And 2024, we're likely to land in a space where we're seeing some economic growth. I don't know that as citizens, we feel that growth on the ground, because when you go to the supermarket, and then you have the boogeyman of utilities about to increase, those sorts of things.
He did say no increases because they can't settle on the rates.
But I think citizens will find it a bit of a challenge to reconcile the fact that the economy is growing and my salary increasing, and I still have to, one supermarket offers these deals every month or something like that, and people are flocking to those deals, not necessarily because they like that particular supermarket, but because
it seems cheaper.
It is cheaper in some cases. Some of the items are in fact cheaper. So you will go in there. I remember going into the supermarket on one occasion and long queues, and I was kind of trying to figure out, well, what's happening here? And I got a little confused and I left because I wasn't too sure what the crowd was about. So I just left, and then I realized, oh, okay, all right, that's what's going on, because people are trying to identify these opportunities for bargains so that they can get more bang for their buck. And it is going to take some time, I think, before the growth that is being seen at the high level actually trickles down to the average citizen. I mean, I think, I don't apologize for that. I think really we still are seeing a situation where citizens are still trying to kind of like balance their books in a way every month or every week or every fortnight when they get paid.
How long does it take for that trickle down to happen? Is it a slow trickle, a quick trickle?
Is a trickle. I don't want to give a time frame for the trickle, but
usually from an economic perspective, let's go with the theory.
Well, remember
of how trickle
there are lots of things that can impact on the trickle. Again, opportunity to share some information. When we go to the supermarket to buy goods and services, it's not so much about what is happening at the macroeconomic space in terms of it is what is happening in the rest of the world. So anything that impacts on supply chain, so whether the Panama Canal doesn't have enough water because of climate change and ships can't turn, or Russia-Ukraine conflict is causing ships to take a longer route, which is going to increase the cost of importing goods and services, that is what really impacts on us in the supermarket.
Right.
There has been some relaxation, but I think within the last week I heard about something happening in some of the ports in the United States. So I mean, all of the precisely. So all of these things impact on the price when we go to the shelf, and I don't think that many persons understand that a tin of corned beef is not made in Trinidad and Tobago. It comes from somewhere, and there are lots of things that impact on the cost of that. So it's complex. It is frustrating at times for consumers. But I think, as I said, I welcome the opportunity to come and have a chat on these issues so that I can hopefully bring some clarity. Some people probably out there not quite buying what I'm saying, but I welcome the opportunity to come and bring some of the clarity on these issues.
Well, I thank you so much for joining us this morning and for bringing some clarity and for breaking it down a little bit for us. I mean, I wish we had more time to sit and discuss it, because I know, we could break down a 5-hour speech and you'll
5 hours and 13 minutes, yes, 5 hours and 13 minutes.
But who's counting? But who's counting? Thank you so much, Dr. Attz,
You're most welcome.
Have
a wonderful day.
We take a quick break and we come back with more. It's Friday on the Now Morning Show. Stay tuned.